there is no experience without an experiencer. So we know that. We know that this thing that appears in our perception, and which we call a brain with certain brain activity, correlates with other types of experience, namely inner life. If I sit on a meadow and I look at the flowers and the blue sky, that's an experience. If a neuroscientist were sitting next to me and with instrumentation looking at my brain and its activity, the perception of the neuroscientist, which is also an experience, would correlate with my view of the meadows. There would be a correlation between what I experience and what the neuroscientist sees as far as my brain and its activity. I'm not saying that one causes the other. We do not know that. But we know that they correlate, independent of any theory. We know that. And we also know that whatever we call matter, whatever matter is, the brain is a material system just like the rest of the universe. We can imagine it as composed of atoms and force fields just like the rest of the cosmos. There is no fundamental difference in stuff between a brain and a galaxy. It's the same periodic table, the same elements, arranged in different ways. So we know these four things. They are independent of theory or metaphysics. Yeah? Now, what is the simplest explanation for what we know? I will offer you 3 points. The first one is that experience is the behavior of that which experiences. Like ripples are the behavior of water. Like the dance is a behavior of the dancer. Why is this the simplest approach to the problem? Because it avoids having to postulate the existence of anything else. There is only that which experiences, and its behaviors account for the entire dynamics of the universe, the variety of experiences. There's nothing to experience but that which experiences, in the same way that there is nothing to ripples other than water. In the same way that there is nothing to a dance other than the dancer in movement. Yeah? Everybody still with me? We have to grant that there are two perspectives to experience, like two camera angles to the same phenomenon, a first-person and a second-person perspective. The brain is simply the second-person perspective of experience. If I'm sitting on the meadows looking at a flower, and the neuroscientist is looking at my brain and its activity, my experience of the flower is a first-person perspective. This experience of the flower appears to the neuroscientist as the experience of my brain and its activity. My brain and its activity is the second-person perspective of the first-person experience of the flower. I'm not saying one causes the other. I'm saying they are two camera angles of the same event, of the same phenomenon. The neuroscientist acquires a second-person perspective of my watching the flowers. And my watching the flowers, obviously, is the first-person perspective. So far, so good? Now it starts getting interesting. We need, because of reason and because of empirical evidence, we need to make an inference, and that is what we might call the cosmic brain. Normally, I wouldn't use expressions like this, but in this place, I feel safe enough to talk about cosmic brains and all that. You see, because the brain is a material system like the rest of the universe, made of the same atoms and force fields, if the brain is the second-person perspective of inner life, then the universe as a whole must also be the second-person perspective of cosmic-level inner life, unless we arbitrarily say that nature behaves differently on different scales, which is entirely arbitrary. So the fact that the brain is the second-person perspective of somebody's inner life suggests very strongly to us that the universe as a whole is the second-person perspective of God's inner life, if we might use that word in context here. I'm using the G word in context, please. And you might say, well, is this crazy? Because the universe doesn't look at all like a brain. And guess what? It does. This is a picture of a mouse's brain showing a few neurons and their interconnects. This is a simulation of the universe at its largest scales. And they look pretty much alike. And you might say, well, image comparisons are misleading because you can always crop it in a certain way and take a certain angle. There have been mathematical studies done of the structure of interconnect and growth of the universe, and the conclusion has been that it's surprisingly similar to the structure and patterns of growth of a brain. It was being published a couple of years ago by UC in San Diego, which they even made press releases about it. There was a lot of hoopla back then. So this is consistent entirely with the rationale we have been following so far. Now, why do these two perspectives of experience emerge? Because you see, if you have an integrated psyche, a mind, there is only one perspective. There are ideas, emotions, other contents of consciousness associated with one another within that mind. How does the second-person perspective emerge? My suggestion to you is that it arises out of a process of dissociation. Have you ever heard of people with multiple personality disorder? With separate alters or separate personalities that sort of become dissociated from each other and don't identify with the whole of the psyche anymore, but only with a subset. This happens every day in psychiatric wards. Most of us have experienced some form of dissociation at some point in our life, not as dramatic as dissociative identity disorder, but nonetheless. So the idea is that certain subsets of ideas and emotions and other mental contents in that mind evoke each other in a cluster and stop evoking anything outside them. So they become a sort of island that acquires a localized sense of identity. Illusory, but it happens. Now, the key point here is that this forms a psychic boundary around the alter. It's a division, an illusory division, but the division that arises in mind. The cognitive activity here around the alter, the sea around the island, is still active. Consciousness is still moving, creating experiences, ideas, and emotions. And that activity bounces off the boundary, if you wish, excites that boundary, and becomes perceived from the point of view of the alter as what we call sense perception. What are the boundaries of the alter? My skin, my eyes, my nose, my tongue, my ears. These are the boundaries of my alter. The activity in God's mind, in the cosmic consciousness, that is outside my alter, not outside consciousness, outside my alter, bounces off those boundaries and excites the cognitive activity inside. We register that as sense perception, as what you see, what you hear, what you taste, textures you feel with your skin. So when I look at the medals, that's the excitation of the boundaries of my alter, the excitation of my sense organs, of the cognitive activity, the ideas and emotions in the mind of God, in the parts of mind, of cosmic consciousness, of infinite consciousness, that are not dissociated. It's a very simple interpretation and very parsimonious interpretation of what's going on that requires nothing but that which experiences. Nothing else is postulated here. Nisargadatta Maharaj already said this decades ago. When you see the world, you see God. There is no seeing God apart from the world. Beyond the world, to see God is to be God. I don't think this is some sophisticated metaphor for some abstract spiritual reality. I think he meant this quite literally. I mean, the man couldn't have been more clear, right? More straightforward. Let me paraphrase to you this so you understand what I think he meant. When I see your body, I see you. There is no seeing you apart from your body. Beyond your body, to see you is to be you. The universe is the body of God. The universe is to the inner life of God, like your brain, your body, is to your inner life. Your brain is the second-person perspective of your inner life. The universe is the second-person perspective of God's inner life, of cosmic consciousness, mind at large, infinite consciousness, whatever name one wants to give to it. Yeah? How much more clear could the poor Nisargadatta have been? And we build all these abstractions around it and try to find some secret meaning. Anyway, the body is the perceptual image of an alter, a dissociative alter in the cosmic mind. What I'm suggesting is that cosmic mind has a form of dissociative identity disorder. Disorder between quotes. I don't mean it negatively. Yeah? I don't mean it as a bad thing. And, I'm sorry. Let me see how I come back to where I was here. And we are its altars. We are dissociated altars, not altars, altars. The dissociated altars of God, the split-off personalities of God. And the body is the image of that dissociative process. Remember, I said that the cognitive activity surrounding an altar excites the boundaries of the altar and turns into perception. If there is dissociation going on in this cognitive neighborhood of an altar should see an image of that dissociative process, just like everything else in nature has an image. I claim that the image is a body of a person, of a mosquito, of a bacteria, of a plant, I don't know, a living body is the image of a process of dissociation just next door. Actually, dissociative processes have images. Last year, there was this paper published. They put people with dissociative identity disorder in a brain scanner, and they could image these little dissociative processes going on in their brains. It looks like something. It has an image. Now, what about God's brain, the universe? We don't need the scanner because we live inside it. Right? There is no skull that we need to look through. We are inside God's brain, right here. Look around you. What is the image of the dissociated altars in God's mind? It's other people, other living beings. As above, so below. Is this scientifically substantiated? That's a question that always comes, right? Back in 2005, I mean, the projector is not very good, but it says 2005 year Nature magazine, the world's most respected scientific journal. Professor Richard Cohn-Henry already said, quite literally, the universe is entirely mental on Nature magazine. And he based this assertion on experiments about quantum entanglement that had been going on since 1981. It started with Alain Aspect in France, and there were several other experiments in the late 90s in Switzerland. And these experiments showed that a universe outside consciousness was very convoluted to defend. It was very difficult to admit possible. And Cohn-Henry went as far as to call it a spiritual universe, mental and spiritual. Live and enjoy, he said, in nature. What happened since then? This was 10 years ago. Since then, a bunch of more sophisticated experiments have been done and published. Two very important ones this year, one in Australia, one in the Netherlands, where I live, basically corroborating Henry's conclusions. Why is this not more talked about in the media? It beats me, but it's there. Here are the references. If any one of you is curious, go have a look. Now, we've been talking about this one mind, right? One consciousness. But panpsychists don't think like this, scientific panpsychists of the modern kind. They think of mind as fragmented, as little bits of mind associated to little bits of matter that then you can put together. Why that? Where does the error occur? What is the motivation for that? I'll tell you what I think. And Chris is here. In half an hour, he will prove me wrong. But this is what I think. They assume the structure of the behavior of consciousness to be the structure of consciousness itself. This is like dropping a pebble on a body of calm water, and then you see those concentric rings of ripples form. It's like saying that the water is made of concentric rings. Concentric rings are the structure of the behavior of the water, the ripples. They're not the structure of water itself. The water is not made of concentric rings. When panpsychists look at the world and they see matter fragmented, all little bits of matter all over the place, atoms and accelerators and colliders that make those particles even smaller, they attribute that fragmentation to consciousness itself. But what is matter but an expression, a behavior, an excitation of consciousness? You can't attribute the structure of matter to that in which matter unfolds, for the same reason that you can't attribute the structure of ripples to water. A dancer doesn't take its anatomy from the choreography of the dance. The structure of the dancer has nothing to do with the structure of the dance. Non-duality does not make this mistake, so let's listen to how Rupert describes this. If I can find the play button here, which I'm not finding. There we go.
Your relationship to thoughts and perceptions is the same as the relationship between a screen and an image. The screen doesn't derive its qualities from the image.
The water doesn't derive its qualities from the rings of ripples. The dancer doesn't derive its anatomy from the choreography. Consciousness doesn't derive its structure from the structure of matter. It's just as simple. Artificial sentience, this idea, this dream of engineers, I'm almost through, this dream of engineers to create an artificial entity that has a private, subjective inner life of its own. This is not artificial intelligence. Intelligence does not require sentience. I'm talking about artificial sentience here, a la ex machina. This assumes panpsychism. They start from the assumptions of panpsychism. Namely, the idea is that since matter is fragmented, bits of matter correspond to bits of consciousness. So if you put these bits of matter/consciousness together, you can construct a complex mind from the bottom up by combination of minds. That's the entire idea behind artificial sentience, artificial consciousness. So the idea is that you start from something that is fundamentally fragmented, then you put them together, and somehow, boom, it becomes one combined, integrated mind. There are two problems with this. One, which I already mentioned. This starting point is not justifiable. There is no reason to believe that consciousness is fundamentally fragmented to begin with. So this is already highly problematic. But it gets worse. This is an appeal to magic. It's like that cartoon where there is a complex mathematical derivation, and then in the middle of it, it says, and here a miracle happens. Well, here a miracle happens. What physical process can combine minds that are fundamentally separate? Electromagnetic fields? We are all immersed in the same complex electromagnetic fields right now, from the access points of the internet, cell towers. I don't feel I'm merging with the internet and with you through the internet right now. Physical contact? We can touch each other as intimately as we want. I don't think our minds really merge. As a matter of fact, neurons don't touch. Where you would think that neurons would touch, the synapse here, if you look closely, if you zoom in, there is a gap called the synaptic cleft. Neurons don't touch. To bridge that gap, they throw balls at each other. Neurotransmitter molecules, basically. Do you think that if I threw a ball at you and you threw the ball back at me, our minds would merge? It wouldn't. What if we took 7 billion people on the planet to throw and got them to throw gazillions of little balls at each other according to complex closed cycles of information integration? Is there any reason to believe that our minds would merge into one superhuman mind on the planet? No. Complexity and scale does not change the fact that the principles that apply do not justify that magic step of mind integration. People who hide behind complexity and scale, I dare to say, are not being intellectually honest. They are appealing to a mysterious miracle that happens at a scale that we can't imagine. So this doesn't hold any water. What does? Well, go back to non-duality. You don't need the magic of combination, because it's already one to begin with. It is one consciousness. There is no magic. It's the way nature is set up. And the illusion of separation arises from a top-down process of dissociation within that cosmic mind. This explains everything without any miracle and without anything that we don't know to exist. Dissociation is well known. It's to some extent understood, but it's certainly well known. Any psychiatric ward, any person who does therapy will even be familiar with it first person. It's a much better ontology for what's going on. Much more mature. How do you restore sanity to this quest for artificial sentience? Well, the first step is to recognize that this idea of creating consciousness is entirely nonsensical. Create what? Consciousness is that wherein creation happens. It's already there. What are you trying to create, right? When we talk about creating a sentient being artificially that has a private inner life, subjective inner life of its own, what we are talking about is an attempt to induce dissociation in cosmic mind by artificial means. In other words, not through normal biological reproduction. That's what we're talking about. It's taking a piece of that consciousness that is already out there and dissociating it, separating it at an illusory level from the rest, So it acquires an illusory sense of separate personal identity. Computers and robots, to the extent that they are not alive, will not have private inner lives of their own, because life is the image of dissociation. If you're trying to induce dissociation, start from what you already know about it: metabolism, self-organization, reproduction. That's where you go. That's what the universe, that's what reality is telling you the phenomenon is. So we may succeed in artificially inducing dissociation in cosmic mind. I don't deny that we may succeed, but if we do, it will look much more like this than like that, unfortunately. I much prefer that one, but anyway. Summary, we are bringing this to a close. I still have 3 minutes. There is experience, we know that. Therefore, there is that which experiences. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is, but it is there. Experiences are both the behavior of that which experiences, or TWE, and the witnessing of that behavior by TWE itself. The behavior and the witnessing are one and the same process. They are not separate. It's one process called experience. Since the behavior of TWE accounts for all experiences, it accounts for all reality, because a reality outside experience might as well not exist. What are we talking about? Therefore, to explain the world, we do not need to infer or postulate anything other than TWE, that which experiences. Beautifully parsimonious, just like scientists like. The inner life of each living being is a dissociated alter of TWE, and the image of that dissociation are living, metabolizing bodies. Living organisms are what these alters look like then, from a second-person perspective, through the screen of perception. Panpsychism mistakenly attributes the structure of the behavior of TWE to TWE itself. I don't think this is logically sound. I think it's a fault in thinking. And to create a sentient being, what one should try to do is to induce dissociation in TWE, create life from non-life, abiogenesis, as it's called in science, instead of trying to reproduce in a computer the information flow that one can measure in a human brain. You see, a simulation is not the phenomenon. I can very accurately simulate the working of kidneys on my computer tomorrow, on my desktop, very accurately simulate the inner workings of kidneys. But the computer will not pee on my desk. Sorry about this very visual analogy. A simulation of kidneys doesn't cause my computer to pee. The simulation is not the phenomenon. To simulate information flow in a computer, as it happens in a human brain, will not cause the computer to have a dissociated, separate, private, conscious inner life of its own. It's just that simple. We should try to create life from non-life. This brings me to the end. There are more details of all this in this book. It's available in the bookstore. Thanks.